Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest is Julie Scelfo, founder of Mothers Against Media Addiction. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan. My name is Neil Parekh. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and our Digimentors website. Please note we're live on my Twitter account this week, not Sri's, but still do everything you do on social media. Please like, comment, share, retweet, tag your friends. Let them know about this important discussion we're going to have today about social media, parenting, and how parents can be advocates for their children, especially fighting back against screen time. I'm particularly interested in this discussion. My daughter is 11 years old. It's a constant conversation in our household. She doesn't have a smartphone yet, but we're always talking about it. We are looking forward to it. Of course, in addition to talking about Mothers Against Media Addiction, we'll review the week's news from the print edition of the Sunday New York Times. Let us know where you're watching from and put it in the comments, and we'll be able to put it on screen. Uh, we are always glad to be with you every week. Last week, we had an incredible show. Anna Packman was our guest, a disability rights advocate. But we also had Tom Jolly join us at the top of the show to talk about breaking news. As you recall, last Saturday is when there was an assassination attempt on former President Trump. And that certainly had an impact on the front page. Tom Jolly walked us through that. You can find that show and others in our archives. Let's take a quick hello for a few folks watching. Sashi saying, joining early from Washington, D.C. Sashi, always great to have you. Doug Levy saying good morning from San Francisco. It's 5:30 a.m. Pacific time. Jonathan saying, offering greetings from New York. And Enoch Fisher joining us from Chicago. A new name for me, maybe Sri or Julie recognizes him. And of course, Stephen Kaplan saying good morning, and Ken Fisher saying good morning from a calm Cedar Rapids, Iowa. With that, let's bring on our host, Sri Srinivasan. Sri, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning, Neil. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's Sunday morning and it's the New York Times Read Along. Last week, as you heard from Neil, we had Tom Jolly, the print editor of the New York Times, who's been a guest multiple times, join us at very short notice to talk about the changes in the paper that day. And we also had Anna Packman talk about disabilities, and we learned so much from her. You can find our entire archives at digimentors.group and look for the New York Times Read Along tab at the front of the top of the page. We do this Sundays 8:30 to 10 a.m. reading the newspaper to talk about the news, to talk and fight misinformation, disinformation. And we don't just do the New York Times. We've done all kinds of newspapers, the Washington Post, the Chicago papers, we've done the Toronto papers, the Khaleej Times in Dubai. And all of this is because we love the news, and I love print even today. And what we are so excited about is to talk to you today with Julie Scelfo, and we have so much to learn from her as we all work together to fight media addiction. And tell us where you're watching from. Tell us your own adventures with media addiction, tech addiction, and what are the things that you have learned along the way. And we want to just remind everyone that this show is brought to you by our friends at muckrack.com. Check them out. If you are a PR person, you already know them. And if you're a journalist, you want to be part of the largest verified database of journalists in the world, and it's completely free for journalists. So you want to join right away. And if you'd like to sponsor us, Sri at digimentors.group or Neil at digimentors.group. And Digimentors is our company which does all kinds of cool digital stuff. We make shows like this for you. If you'd like a show, let us know. A podcast, video show, live shows, conferences, anything hybrid or virtual we can make for you. We also do PR, marketing, training workshops, and I've been doing AI workshops around the world. And now we do AI policy and as well as strategy and scenario planning. And I used to look like that when I started teaching 25 plus years ago, and now I look like that. That was our first workshop on AI at the Southern Poverty Law Center, such an important organization. And we are just delighted that you can be with us. What we're going to do is just look at the paper for a minute and then bring on Julie, because we want to get to her and her story and all the great work she's doing. But we do want to show you what the paper is. And then after interviewing her and chatting with her, then we'll read the paper together. And we're going to do all this till 10 a.m. Eastern time. If you're watching live, please comment, please share, tag a friend anywhere in the world who needs to know what's going on in the news and who would appreciate it. And they can watch us live or later on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, as well as on Instagram. And you can find us on all of those platforms. We'll just say hi to Patty watching on Facebook, and Paula Kiger, longtime producer of the shows in Tallahassee. And Patty says she loves the New York Times Read Along. And last week, Walter Greason, the great author and professor, wrote that this is the best streaming show on Sunday mornings. And we really appreciated that. All right, so what's going on with the news? Let's just take a look. And you can see here, I just pulled up Saturday's paper first, just to remind you about the software crisis of yesterday and the outage. Were you affected by that? Tell us. I hope we learned some lessons. Look at Manila Airport, people on massage chairs as total chaos reigned everywhere. Inside the fight to keep Biden atop the ticket is the story here. And then Musk goes from Trump skeptic to Trump to true believer. That was the stories yesterday. But what's happening in the paper today, the lead story, ill and isolated, Biden is stewing at calls to exit. Trump's team privately preps for Harris run. And then look at this picture, safeguarding Ukrainian literature at all costs. And over here, taking in stray cattle and infuriating a town in Newfane, New York, and detailing the life of a gunman, though the why is still elusive, which is really surprising, as we know in these cases. And there's so much more to the newspaper here. We're going to look at all of this in a little bit with Julie. But I think we are ready to bring Julie on and have her talk to us about all kinds of work that she's doing to help families around the country and around the world. So our guest is Julie Scelfo. She is founder, Mothers Against Media Addiction, MAMA, one of the great acronyms, and we are delighted to have her with us. So let's welcome Julie onto the show.
Good morning, Sri. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. We always ask, are you a Sunday morning person?
Well, Sunday morning is usually the day I like to stay in bed as long as possible, but spending time with you is worth getting up for. I'm still drinking my coffee, and I hope you don't mind that I might be a little groggy.
No, but you'll be great. And thank you for inviting your audience on Facebook, on Twitter, on sharing this so that your audience can also see you in a new light, in a different setting. Normally, you're a lot of times on television, and here we are doing something a little different. I do want to remind you that when we first connected was a very long time ago, because I have the proof right here.
Oh boy.
This is a Newsweek. Let me just turn on my camera here. This is a Newsweek story. Here you
Oh
can see
my
the date
gosh.
from
Oh my gosh.
2004. And if I pull back, you'll see me with hair over here. You were so kind. And there's your byline. There's you and Barbara wrote the story in Newsweek about Indian Americans or South Asian Americans and some great, great folks. This is Floyd Pardoes, who passed away, one of the first people to pass away in the pandemic that we knew. And here is Atul Gawande, who, as you know, went on to try to fix healthcare. Him, Warren Buffett, Jamie Dimon, and Jeff Bezos couldn't fix healthcare, but he tried. Gautam Chopra, Dinesh D'Souza is on here, and a young Kamala Harris was among your list of, all of us were on a list of 25 people under 40 or something like that. And Anshu Jain, sadly, who was at Deutsche Bank, has passed away. So, you know, in these 20 years, it's just over 20 years ago, you did this story. Nora Jones, Jhumpa Lahiri, Parminder Nagra, DJ Rekha. What a list. And I was honored to be part of that list. And they took this picture at Neil is pulling up the story, but here you can see this is my classroom at Columbia Journalism School, where I was. So I was so grateful for you with the story. It was going to be a cover story in the
Was it?
magazine.
It
And you can
wasn't?
see here, it was not, because that week was the bombing that took place in Barcelona, the train bombing. And because of that, that was knocked off the front page. That's what became the cover. But we did make the corner of the cover
The
of
cover
Newsweek.
line.
Yes.
You know, wow. First of all, that is incredible. What a throwback. Thank you for reminding me of that. Second of all, I am very proud of that story, and I'm a little embarrassed about that story because, you know, it was one of these things where Newsweek appeared to have, quote unquote, discovered South Asians, like, you know, the new thing. And, you know, there was this moment where a number of South Asians were really rising to prominence in the United States. But at the same time, you know, it was one of those things where I think the mainstream media was often run by predominantly white editors, and there was this sense that they had like discovered something that had always been there. So that part I didn't love about it, but I was very proud to get to feature those folks. And you know, I think I had first known about your work from Columbia, but that story and what you mentioned about the cover is also really interesting to me because it's emblematic of what's changed in our media environment, you know, in a time where print played such an important role at the news weeklies, not just Newsweek, but Time and US News. The editor's job was to constantly evaluate what was happening. And all week, right up until we went to print on Saturday night, we were making decisions about what's most important for people to know. So, you know, it was frustrating to work there, for example, like I actually vividly remember the photograph that was going to run on the cover. It was a beautiful photograph. And at the very last minute, it got pulled. And it's heartbreaking when you're the one who's supposed to be, you know, Jumpa was in that photo. And, you know, it's heartbreaking when those things change. But the editor has to be really sort of neutral and not thinking about people's feelings, but ask the hard question, what's the most important thing for the public to think about in the news? And that bombing obviously was decided that was more newsworthy than this particular topic in that moment. But, you know, the internet has exploded all that, right? Because we have culture news, entertainment, sports, war, health, all of it just appears in the same context on a web page, and people don't get that sort of editor's judgment about what's most important in the same way. But what a story. I hope you share the link to that with your audience, because so many leading thinkers, gosh, Floyd, what a loss to our world and to our culinary landscape.
And Shazia Sikandar, the painter, and you got a lot of people very early. Look at, you got Kamala Harris when she was just getting started in public life. And then there's some lines here that, you know, in 20 years later, not all of us could defend all our lines that we ever written, but it's the most visible ethnic breakout since Ricky Martin let Americans know that Latinos were living La Vida Loca. And at least we didn't get a pun on saris or bindis or anything like that. So I think you played it pretty straight. And really, congratulations on being ahead of time. Now it's obvious that we have things like this. And I should point out, the reason someone like, say, Fareed Zakaria isn't on this list, which he totally would have been if this was done by somebody else, was he was the editor of
Yes.
Newsweek at the time, so it wouldn't have made sense.
Newsweek International, yep.
Yeah, Newsweek International, so it wouldn't have made sense. And also what has changed in that time is also technology, right? So here you have Sabir Bhatia. Some of you will remember Sabir, or at least every Indian knew his name for a while because he created Hotmail, and Hotmail was the hottest tech company in the world. And we're talking today after the CrowdStrike and Microsoft disaster over the weekend, and the head of Microsoft himself is Indian American in Satya Nadella. So, you know, they bought Hotmail for $400 million, and that's why that was a big story. And so this is all very, very cool stuff, and it hangs very proudly on my wall. This is actually my wife's office, so I brought this in to show you, but it hangs very proudly on my wall, and so grateful that you were able to put that, bring that attention to our community. So thank you. And
Sri, I wanted to offer just where things have gone since then. That was
Mhm.
2004. In the New York Times yesterday, at least online, Indian Americans become a political force just as Usha Vance's profile rises. And this is an incredible article for me, having worked in Indian American politics 30 years ago or so, about 95 to 2001. No members of Congress, a handful of staff members. And now this article, lists all the accomplishments. Kamala Harris as VP, Usha Vance as a potential VP spouse. I still shudder at the thought, but it's there. 5 members of Congress, something like 40 state legislators. It's so much has happened in the last 20 years, Sri.
Yeah.
And
And
I wrote a book a couple years ago called The Women Who Made New York, and it was a
Yes.
collection of biographies of women from the 1600s till today who helped make New York City. DJ Reka, actually, from that story ended up in the book. I think probably some other folks too. But as I was writing the book, a friend of mine who is Chinese American came up to me and she said, "Are there any Chinese American, women in the book?" And, this was 2016. And I was so touched and hurt and sad when she asked me that, because I realized that despite how diverse a place the US is, there is still such an underrepresentation of people of diverse backgrounds in the mainstream media. And I think the internet has given us many things. It's also taken many things away. Social media now has allowed the grip of mainstream media from defining the narrative a certain way to get out from under the control of mainstream media. And we have many more voices. This is good and bad. One of the good parts of it, though, I think, is that there's a lot more representation, and you can no longer, we're all no longer forced to see the world only through a very narrow, sort of white dominant viewpoint. And I think that's a really good thing.
yeah, thank you so much for saying that and for putting that in perspective. Ken says, I love the story of a story from 20 years ago. We have never started our show talking about a piece from 20 years ago, so that was interesting. Pradnya says, don't get me started on Usha Vance. I got started on Usha Vance and her husband and wrote a newsletter the other day about them, and there's so many questions and comments coming out about that. And Pradnya says, hello from Silver Spring. And Patty calls the show The Real News. Jonathan says he wasn't affected by the outage, but I avoid doing anything that might have been affected by it. And Shashi, who's very much a tech entrepreneur and very involved in tech, says surprisingly, he wasn't affected by this. Were you affected in any way?
Luckily I wasn't. I stayed offline as long as possible. One of the things that sort of led to the creation of Mama, which we can talk about in a little bit, is that too many of us are what the NYU scholar Meredith Broussard calls techno-chauvinists. And techno-chauvinists are people who think that the best solution to any problem is always technology. And tech can be fun, tech can be helpful, but it's not automatically the best solution. For example, a technology we use to turn on our lights are switches, and they work pretty well. You install a switch in your house, and most of us never have to think about replacing the switch for the lifetime of the house. Now, if you switch and use an app and you get a smart switch for your lights, I have heard from too many people who design their homes with smart technology of what a disaster this is, because if their phone runs out of battery, they can't turn on the lights. If the software needs to be updated, they can't turn on the lights. So, tech can be really helpful, but it's not always automatically the best solution. And for too long, we've raced ahead. We've used tech for all kinds of things, and we don't always consider the potential negative effects. So an outage like that on that scale is an example. The ransomware attacks that we've seen on American cities is an example. What happens, having medical charts online is really amazing and an improvement if, for example, we're traveling and we have a medical emergency in another state and our doctors are able to quickly send our files. But what happens if the power goes out, for example, and you can't access the charts? The old-fashioned handwritten chart might actually be more useful in that situation. So there's just lots lots of things to consider. I think a better way of building our world is being thoughtful and asking those questions when we're making decisions about the best technologies to use.
Thank you. I 100% agree with you. Because I'm considered a tech evangelist, I always say also tech skeptic. And in our home, we haven't put on many smartphones, I mean, smart lights, but smart switches, but we did get a smart, or not so smart, but a remote control for our blinds in the bedroom. And we knew from day one this could be a problem, so we kept that remote very carefully in a specific drawer and all of that, and we still had issues with it. And that just tells you that this. So eventually we took that away and we put up regular blinds that you could do the old-fashioned way. And Jonathan says, I just had this argument with a window blind company which tried to upsell me on an app to open and close the blinds. He wrote that before my example. And so Jonathan, I'm with you there. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on this. This is the world that we live in. We do want to say hi to a very special viewer who's a great supporter of the show. This is Sudha Parekh, Neil's mom, watching from Fort Lee, New Jersey. And Neil likes to count this as one of his, mandatory check-ins with mom. So I like that. He gets a free check-in every week, in addition to the other calls he gets to do.
I did see her twice last week, though, Sri, in person. We have to go to Connecticut, for a funeral. We stopped in New Jersey on Tuesday, 2 hours then, and then Friday night and Saturday morning. So I think we're good for about a month, right, Mom? We're good? Okay.
As a mother of boys, you're never good. And
Never good.
I'm glad to hear it. Keep visiting, keep calling the parents.
We might see her in August. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, so folks, if you're just joining us, that's Julie. I'm Sri. We are so happy to have you with us. Julie is the founder of Mothers Against Media Addiction, which we're going to get into in great length. We are reading the newspaper together on a Sunday morning. This is not what she usually does. She's not usually camera ready at 8:30 a.m., but she's done that for us, and we're very grateful. And let's get to the story of Mama and maybe a little bit about your journey that brought you there. So we established 20 years ago you were writing for Newsweek and the old stream media.
I don't usually bring up 20-year-old stories, but since you did that, I'll share. This is a story I wrote for Newsweek.
Oh my God.
Let's see, what year was this?
That's
also 20 years ago, September 13th, 2004. And this story came about in part because I noticed in psychology journals they were using a new word. They called it overindulgence. And what was happening is therapists who had built their career on, seeing patients who were in crisis or had serious mental health problems were suddenly seeing adults coming in, calling them like, oh, I'm in crisis, I need help. And they were like, what's wrong? And the young adult would say, not that there had been a death or some major thing. They would say, well, my girlfriend broke up with me, or, oh, I lost my job. And what the therapist had discovered was that this group of young people had never really experienced struggle as young people. They had never had to solve their own problems. They had really been what they called overindulged as children by their parents. And by the time they got to adulthood, they didn't have the coping skills that they needed to be healthy adults. And this was the beginning of, your audience might have heard like helicopter parenting or snowplow parenting, where parents were really preventing kids from acquiring all the building blocks they needed to grow up to be healthy and I mean, socially and emotionally healthy adults. And so that actually affected my thinking, along with the changes that I saw in newsrooms around the use of the internet. Many newsrooms, when social media came around, encouraged their employees to go out and create social media accounts. I vividly remember being called into the conference room at the New York Times and being told that we needed to start Twitter accounts. And while I understood this idea that maybe we didn't want to be quote unquote left behind if lots of people were going on social media, I also was asking myself the question, well, how is the public going to regard journalists if now, instead of waiting to share our thoughts only after we had reported them, fact-checked them, our thoughts had been carefully edited, copy edited, if we're now sort of online sharing what we had for breakfast and our opinions about public speakers, how is that going to reshape the public's perception of the role of journalism? So, that was a concern I had. I had noticed the changes in parenting. I am raising 3 children. And when my oldest son was born, there were no iPhones, and Mark Zuckerberg worked at a small company called the Facebook. And by the time my second son was born and I took him to pre-K, every parent in the neighborhood was on Facebook. And whether they intended to or not, they were inadvertently training their children to be photographed constantly, let me take your picture and post it. And then it was normal to sort of share everything online. And then my third son now is growing up in a world of TikTok. And even though he's not allowed to have TikTok on his phone, his friends send him TikToks. Snap sends him, short reels. YouTube has gone to shorter and shorter reels. And so the entirety of the media environment in which our kids are growing up is very, very, very different than when any of us were growing up. And so all of these problems together have created really what I think of as a malignant information environment. Report after report after report has been coming out from think tanks warning us about truth decay, warning us about the difficulty for the public to differentiate different types of information, warning us about the crisis of mis and disinformation that has infiltrated social media spaces and has being weaponized by foreign governments and bad actors who are interested in seeing Americans turn on one another, interested in seeing us not know what the truth is and disbelieving even credible sources of truth. And then I did a lot of reporting on mental health while I was at Newsweek. And then at the New York Times, I was sent to cover a suicide at the University of Pennsylvania. It was the death of Madison Holleran a few years ago. And that reporting led me to really begin to see the role of social media in eroding mental health. It was clear from all of the students I talked to that social media was causing young people to go through puberty in a different way. And as sad as that story was, and I know most of your audience is adults, because otherwise I wouldn't say all this, but if a year or two later, we began to see increased suicide in children as young as 10. Right now in the United States, the number 2 cause of death to 10-year-olds is suicide. And Shri, as a parent, when I was realizing that more 10-year-olds are dying now at their own hands than from cancer, something in me changed. And I was like, I can't just keep reporting on this stuff. I want to do something about it. And that led me to really begin to ask the question of how we can galvanize national awareness of the need to fight back against media addiction, the need to demand that our information environment is a safer place, and the need to protect young people's right to grow up healthy and without having their emotions exploited for profit. So that led to Mama.
Oh, wow. And we're going to take a look at the Mama website in just a moment. Here's some comments. Patty says, thank you, Julie. Patty says, Julie represents moms who mean business in a full circle way, home and work, and breaking glass ceilings for greater good. And Pradnya says, and my children are saying things to me like Skibbity, Rizzler, Ohio. And Neil says, Skibbity, yeah, mine too, ack. And this is sort of the feeling that a lot of parents have as they're dealing with this. So let's look at Mama and talk about what you're working on. Screens are stealing a generation's joy and well-being. Urgent, coordinated action from parents is needed too. And so set the scene for this, please. And how much inspiration did you get from MAD in the 1980s, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, as we know?
We were absolutely inspired by MAD. And the reason why is that MAD not only was able to get laws passed that increased the penalties for drunk driving, but what they did that was so important is they changed our culture. They changed how all of us thought about drunk driving. When I was a kid, adults had a few drinks, got in the car, and really it wasn't seen as sort of a public health problem. If a man had too many drinks and someone tried to stop him from getting in the car, it was seen on as an attack on his masculinity. No, I'm fine. And what MAD helped do is to get us to recognize that this is a social problem. This isn't an individual problem. If someone has a few drinks and gets in the car, it puts all our families at risk. And what we're doing at Mama is we are helping parents take back control of their children's media diets. We are giving parents and allies, because we're not just moms and dads, we're grandparents, aunts, uncles, educators. We're giving them the tools to talk about this stuff, because there isn't a parent in America who doesn't feel that there's a problem, but doesn't necessarily have the vocabulary to be able to talk about this. And we are demanding that lawmakers and policymakers step up and do their jobs. We as parents are responsible for feeding our kids healthy food, but nobody expects parents to keep the food supply safe. It's not our job to make sure that there aren't wood chips in baby formula. And so we work on a chapter basis where individual chapters in different communities get together and communicate with their school boards, their lawmakers, and insist that we take action to keep kids safe. So our website actually isn't very much to look at right now. It's not even our real website. We have a much bigger one in production that'll be up soon. But the reason for the website is so that parents can sign up, get in touch with us. We had hoped to be in 6 states by the end of the year. We're already in 10 states and have 13 chapters up and running. So the mama movement's really growing.
And how do you pay for all this work that you're doing?
So it's all nonprofit. We filed to be a 501c3. Our paperwork still isn't through, but we have fiscal sponsorship. We have generous donors who are supporting our work. We need more. It costs a lot to run our organization. We have a lot of people who are counting on us for support. So our staff is growing constantly. It's growing so fast. Sometimes I don't sleep, but it's an amazing thing that parents were so ready for this. And we have requests to go into 23 more states and 5 countries. So we're scaling up as big as we can. Our website, the best website for us right now is joinmama.org. You can make donations there. People are hosting fundraisers for us. We have fundraisers coming up this summer in Cape Cod and East Hampton. I'm doing an event in Fire Island. We have one coming up in Brooklyn in September. We're heading to San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago. The demand for it is kind of incredible. So,
and everyone should go to joinmama.org, check out information, join their mailing list, and if you can afford to donate, please donate. It makes a difference. She said they're still doing their own 501c3, but they already have fiscal sponsorship, so your money will be tax deductible, which is really important here. And here's one of the articles that's been written, a movement for parents founded by parents. Talk a little bit about the name. Obviously, we love the name Mama, and it makes sense. How much did you spend time thinking about like parents against Pama? But Mama works much better.
Well, I'm glad you love the name. The truth is I had the idea for Mama a while before I even started it. And I'm not the only one to have the idea. Other leaders in the space have said for a long time, we need a mad movement. And I kept thinking, yes, somebody really should do that. And, I'm a feminist. My husband's a very involved parent. I have 3 sons. So originally I wasn't so crazy about the Mama name. I wanted it to be Parents Against Media Addiction because I wanted it to be more inclusive. But actually it was a dad who convinced me that it had to be Mama. He's like, look, nobody wants a t-shirt that says Pama. He's like, Mama's a much better name. He's like, nobody cares. We all get it. MAD was not just an organization of mothers. It was started by some mothers, but there were always dads involved. So we have lots of dads involved. Also grandparents, people who aren't parents, but care about kids. And I think that there's something, there's that Agatha Christie quote that you see on the website. There's something about mothers that evokes a very primal defense of children and a primal love of children. And I think anyone who cares about kids can relate to that. So that's why we have the Mama name. And, I think it's very powerful. We had a rally in front of Meta earlier this year to call on all social media companies to start making their products safer. We have a fact sheet that we make available that I think really help shed light on why we created this movement. You know, a lot of folks don't realize that the algorithms on social media are intentionally designed to addict, and decisions are made to intentionally design children to be addicted. Now, you know, it's a free country, and if you want to offer addictive products to adults and adults want to use them, fine. I'm not going to get involved in that. But there is a problem for me with intentionally offering addictive products to children. We don't think it's acceptable to encourage children to smoke. We don't think it's acceptable to encourage children to gamble, to drink alcohol, you know, engage in activities that we know are harmful. Why would we knowingly encourage our children to use products that are unhealthy? And we know they're unhealthy, not because I say so and my reporting has borne that out, even though it has, but because last year, almost 40 attorneys general filed suits against Meta. And when Meta's own internal documents were released, Meta's own data showed that they know how many 12-year-olds are still awake at 2 a.m. on a school night scrolling through Instagram because they can't get off. They know how the plastic surgery filters and how certain types of content are causing children to be depressed. They measure how much more depressed children were getting when the algorithms were doing certain things. They know how many children are talking about cutting themselves, about eating disorders. It is heartbreaking and it's not cool. So, you know, I have no problem with companies seeking profit, but I do have a problem with seeking profit on the backs of children's mental health. Not cool, won't stand for it. That's what Mama's about.
Yeah, and you're fighting it. You're fighting this problem. We're going to look at some pictures in just a second. Join mama.org and join Julie as we're doing this very important work. And Julie is talking with us today about Mothers Against Media Addiction. The website is joinmama.org. I'm Sri Srinivasan. We are reading the Sunday New York Times together, and she's going to tell us also a little bit about her own non-mama journey, about all the work she's done as a journalist and helping journalists for a long time and people get their voices out. That's one of the things she did at the Op-Ed Project, a wonderful organization. And that's one of the things that she's now doing to help mothers around the country. And we appreciate that very much. Tell us what we're looking at.
And fathers.
And fathers and grandparents and allies and teachers and neighbors and everyone else. This is a landmark moment that I never thought would happen. And we need to explain really what this is we're looking at right here.
Yes. Well, so one of the things going on is that these social media companies are so powerful and they have so much money that they are fighting tooth and nail to ensure that there are no regulations. We have not passed meaningful regulations on social media companies since the 90s, which is when we were all using floppy disks and dialing up AOL with our phone lines. So we urgently need to update the regulations. And every time our lawmakers get close, you see that big tech, social media companies, lobbyists come to Washington, and they have so much money. They have the Issue One and the Council for Responsible Social Media issued a report on this, but there are like there is one lobbyist for every 7 or 8 lawmakers in Washington. There is one Meta lobbyist for every 4 lawmakers in Washington. And what that means is they throw up every single argument you can imagine about why a regulation isn't good. Oh, you know, this is going to prevent free speech. Oh, this is going to inhibit innovation. They even make the argument that if you regulate social media, it will, quote, put LGBTQ kids at risk, which isn't true. LGBTQ kids are actually more vulnerable to harms on social media. They are solicited more often, they experience more hate speech, but there's no reason that LGBTQ kids have to only rely on social media to find community. For example, there can be places where they find like-minded members of their community hosted by PFLAG or GLAAD, for example. Point is, LGBTQ communities existed before social media. So we're fighting back at Mama against the tech lobby, which is trying to prevent legislation. And what happened in this photo that was so exciting is that New York State passed landmark legislation this year, the Safe for Kids Act, which prevents the use of addictive algorithmic feeds for children. A parent can opt in for an addictive option in their child's social media account, but by default, it needs to be not addictive. We also passed the New York Child Data Protection Act, which prevents social media companies from being able to exploit children's data. And that's what so many of them do for profit. It's been estimated by Harvard School of Public Health researchers that social media companies made $11 billion with a B dollars off of minor children last year from their social media products. So this was a landmark moment. Mama was involved in helping make this legislation pass. We were so honored. Governor Kathy Hochul invited us to come to the bill signing, and there we are with some members of Mama.
And I see my good friend Raj Goyal right in that photograph. I was with him yesterday on Fire Island. So tell us about the coalition that made this happen.
So, we were so grateful for Raj's support. Raj, for those who don't know, is a former elected official. He also is a tech entrepreneur, and he is one of a growing number of people in the world of tech and finance who are joining with Mama and saying enough is enough. He's all for innovation. He's all for profit. But like us, he does not believe that we should pursue profit at the expense of children's mental health and at the expense of our democracy. These social media companies have algorithms that promote harmful content. They promote mis and disinformation. They promote hate speech. And all of that just makes it harder and harder to have civil discourse, which is what we urgently need in order for our democracy to be healthy. So Raj has been a great supporter. We loved having him there. There are teachers represented in this group. There are parents represented in this group, step parents. It was wonderful to be there.
And great to see that moment. What did it mean for you to see legislators step up in this way, the government step up in this way?
So, I feel very lucky to be a New Yorker because in order to get these bills passed, we had a wide-ranging coalition. Not only did the governor's office support it, but our incredible Attorney General, Letitia James, supported it. She is one of the attorney generals who brought a suit against Meta. So her office had seen firsthand the internal reports about the product design. People don't think of social media algorithms as products, but that's what they are. And last year, there was an electric skateboard that after it was released, 4 young people died within the first couple months on this skateboard. So we issued a recall and we took that skateboard back to make sure it was safe. I mean, think about the airplane where a door blew off mid-flight. We immediately ground all of those planes to make sure that they're safe for the public. Hundreds of children have died because of social media harms, because they've been sextorted, because of online bullying, because they've received pro-suicidal content. Why haven't they been, these products been recalled? And I think it's because, nobody think this, we see this and we think it's harmless. Like, how could there be a life or death thing on here? Unfortunately, social media can be life or death for children. So that moment was really meaningful for me because to see our lawmakers come together. The bill was sponsored by Brooklyn State Senator Andrew Grunardis, by Assembly Member Nili Rosick, who's a new mom herself, and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle came together. Right now in Washington, the Kids Online Safety Act is pending. It has 70 tripartisan co-sponsors, tripartisan Republicans, Democrats, and an independent. So this is not a partisan issue. Keeping kids safe should not be a partisan issue. I think it may be one of the last bipartisan issues in America. And so I am overjoyed to see the number of lawmakers who are coming forward now and saying we gotta get this done to keep our kids safe.
Thank you. We're looking at some more pictures. Talk us through these. And before you do that, just remind us again, what is the exact law that's been passed? People will be curious to know exactly what it means. And because it's in New York, how does this affect other parts of the country as well?
Okay, so great questions. So the laws that passed in New York were the New York Child Data Protection Act, and if the Safe for Kids Act. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop into the chat if I can, am I allowed to join the chat? I'll put it into Neil and he can add it. But there's an article that I wrote, an op-ed that ran in the New York Post, and it contains a link to the New York bill specifically. So the Safe for Kids Act and the New York Child Data Protection Act addressed addictive feeds and child data privacy. We have no law that protects our data privacy on the federal level. We have no law preventing social media companies from using addictive algorithms. And we do have a law, Section 230, that right now makes social media companies basically immune from prosecution for any content that's on their website. That's a whole long story. So the federal law that we also do have is called COPPA, C-O-P-P-A, Child Online Privacy Protection Act, but it only protects children under 13. So something has been proposed, which is an update to COPPA 2.0, and that would just extend the law to all minors. So any person under 18. Another law that's been proposed is KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act. We are waiting for Chuck Schumer to bring that law proposal to the table. He hasn't done that yet. I'd really like that to happen. I don't know what the delay is, but there are no federal laws protecting our kids right now, which is the issue. So if you go back to the photo before at the rally where the woman was crying, that is Mary Rohde. And if I start weeping, you'll have to forgive me. But Mary is a mom and a teacher. She's a kindergarten teacher. She's been a kindergarten teacher for 20 years. That's a photo of her son. They live way upstate New York on a farm near the Canadian border. Her son had a job. I believe it was in a coffee shop. He saved up his money and he went on Facebook to buy something with his money on Facebook Marketplace. And he was on there a short amount of time and he got a message from a young woman, a town over, who wanted to talk to him. Teenager, excited to hear from this young woman. They engage in conversation, and this young woman sends him sexual material, images of herself, and then invites him to share images of himself. Well, it turns out that she wasn't a young woman. She was a criminal engaging in something that the FBI calls sextortion. And it's when a person, usually a boy, could be a young woman, can also be an adult, is trapped into sending sexually explicit material, and then they're extorted. And he was immediately told if he didn't pay money, they were going to share these compromising images of him with everyone in the contact list and everyone in the community. He was so terrified and upset, he, within a very short amount of time, died by suicide, and has just devastated his family. You know, what a loss to the whole world now. And Mary traveled to share her story with everyone because so many parents don't realize that this is happening. The FBI, if you Google, here, I'm going to put it up. The FBI has issued a report. They've measured at least 12,600 victims of sextortion. They also have counted at least 20 people who have died by suicide after being sextorted. Unfortunately, it's such a common thing now that I've talked to multiple parents whose kids have been sextorted, and they're actually measuring the amount of time between the first sextortion message and the suicide. Encourage your children to always talk to you if they encounter anything online. I have a friend whose son was sextorted. Luckily, he went to his father, and the father immediately said, "Don't worry about this. Don't pay this. Don't respond again. I will handle it." Thank God that child is still with us. But this is a terrible crime that's only growing. And I was so grateful to Mary for joining us in New York to share her story.
Wow, thank you for sharing all of this. So important for everybody to be paying attention to this. I see what Pradnya is doing. She's tagging her friends. Everyone, just tag a friend right now on whatever platform you're on: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and then they can see this later. She says that was creepy, so you might find this interesting. Pradnya is tagging Michael Rich, connecting the dots here. All of you should be doing this. And Mary C. Curtis, a great guest on this show, great journalist, says such important work from my friend Julie, who was a guest on my roll call podcast, Equal Time. And
Mary's
thank
one
you.
of the best journalists
Yes,
out there today.
she is.
I'm so honored she's here. Hi, Mary.
Yeah.
She's one of my heroes.
And Pradnya's tagging Nicole for the relevance of the story. I've got to say, I had not heard the word sextortion, and now you're educating us about it. So thank you. And there's so many other things that we just don't know. Shashi says so many great insights on online safety for children. And Diana is watching early in San Francisco, a mother who takes a lot of stands on behalf of her children, and if she isn't working with Mama yet, I'm sure she would be interested in knowing all
Hit
about it.
me up, Diana. We'd love to have you.
Yeah,
I mean,
join
Sri, I
Mama.
wish we didn't have to talk about this. I mean,
Yeah,
how crazy is this? And that's the thing that came out of my reporting. Neil has been so brave in sharing his mental health stuff with this community and talking about it. We are in a national emergency in youth mental health. The American Academy of Pediatrics, along with 2 other medical professional groups, declared a state of national emergency a couple years ago, and we're still in the emergency. We have literally run out of pediatric psychiatric beds in hospitals around the country. That is insane. And we can't allow it to continue. So the solution here is not to start, the solution isn't just to get more mental health care for children and more counselors in schools and more social and emotional wellness programs. The solution is to stop inflicting the problems that are causing mental health crises for children, and to increase the programs that give people social and emotional resiliency, right? We need to do both things. And we know that social media is a primary source of the harms. I don't know if your guests have heard of Jonathan Haidt's wonderful book, The Anxious Generation, which has been on the bestseller list for weeks now. But I encourage them to read that book. It's filled with the same data that I've been reporting for a while that makes it clear we have a problem and what a primary source of the problem is.
Thank you, Neil. I wanted to show that comment that you put up about Stacey Stewart. So talk about that, Neil.
Absolutely. No, I wanted to mention, Julie, since you had said that Mothers Against Drunk Driving was an inspiration, and certainly with the op-ed that you wrote that we shared a moment ago, violence, bullying, it's time to fight digital addiction in kids like drunk driving. Stacey Stewart is a former guest on our show. She's the president and CEO of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I was at United Way when she was the president there. She was a guest on our show when she was at March of Dimes. So we wanted to make sure that she heard the praise and the inspiration that her work has been. I wanted to thank you in particular, Julie, for this example and point out, I mean, as the father of a girl, as we talk about, as a girl dad, and Sri is the father of twins, of course, a lot of the focus is on social media and the impact on girls with body image, etc. And in fact, the last show you mentioned, the mental health work that I've been doing, the last show that I did, our guest was Sarah Wilson, and we focused on the issues that come up for teen girls in therapy. Body image, social media were major issues, and I actually used it as a way to have a conversation with my own daughter about these issues. It's never too early to talk about difficult issues with your child. But I wanted to particularly thank you for this example of a young boy, a man who was sextorted and led to him committing suicide. Because what we found last year when I did a series of shows around supporting survivors of sexual abuse, uh, boys and men are often, I don't want to say overlooked, but not the focus of these conversations, both in terms of survivors of sexual assault. We saw that it could happen to football players and wrestlers. And the question goes, well, you're such a big, strong man. How could this happen to you? The thought is that it only happens to young girls. And when we talk about social media, it's a similar type of thing. So I thought I just wanted to point that out, that was such an important balance that you brought to that.
Thank you for saying that. And as a boy mom, you know, one of the things I've noticed is that in the 20th century, we had magazine covers that really contributed to young women feeling badly about themselves. The cover models were always skinny, they were almost always white, and they had bodies that, you know, 0.001% of the population had, and we all looked at them and felt inadequate because we didn't look that way. And social media has been a great equalizer, and now it's distributing these types of unrealistic body images, not only to young women, but to young boys. You hear young boys talking about gains and this idea that they need to have washboard abs. My sons came home and were talking about needing to have a six-pack before they even hit puberty. I mean, it was ridiculous. So we also have heard from counselors, there's been an increase in boys with body image issues and actual body dysmorphia and eating disorders. So, you know, social media does not discriminate. Mental health does not discriminate. We are seeing mental health problems and social media problems in every part of the population, in every gender identity, and every ethnicity, at every income level. So, you know, keeping children safe and healthy is for all of us. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter where you live or what economic class you're in. We all need to care about our kids' well-being. And sadly, I have met parents who have lost children to online harms from every type of inner city, rural community, every place, because the internet is accessible everywhere. And so it's reaching into our homes everywhere.
What you've really done for us is make it clear that this is an emergency, and the way, if we had a leaky nuclear power plant being built next to us, all of us would be galvanized because we can see the danger, or power, or any other kind of physical danger. You're talking to us about the online dangers resulting in physical harm, and that's so important. Stefan Kaplan, a colleague and dear friend, has been really good with his son, among other things, not putting his photos on the internet randomly. He would not even put his name out there, and I really respected that as a way of doing this. And he's jumping in here late on your early Sunday morning work. Keep 100% eye on your kids with everything tech related. My son is now 17, which I can't believe. Stefan is going to a senior year in high school, and I'm always aware of 99% of his tech use. I say 99 because, of course, we can't know everything. And I think most of us are aware of like 70% if we're lucky. So he was very intentional about this, and that's a word that's very important, the intentionality of how we as parents look at this. And I want to say a couple of things, and Neil's going to pull up my newsletter from last week where I wrote about this, and Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, declaring social media to be an addictive crisis. And one of the things, Julie, as a tech reporter for all of these years, none of this is new in some ways, right? We have gone back. If we think of when the internet was born, people were complaining about what is happening to children. And I even remember doing stories about AOL Instant Messenger as the great crisis, and parents worried about what's happening on AOL Instant Messenger. I used to do stories about what are the code words that kids are using, BRB, be right back, POS, parent over shoulder, things like that. Or there were tools like chat roulette. You might remember that was a great crisis. And I would always say, this too shall pass, but whatever replaces it will be worse.
Well,
So parents
that's
need to be super, super vigilant. And here's that article I wrote, Social Media is the New Cigarettes. US Surgeon General's warnings aren't just for kids. We all need to be involved. We all need to work together. And Julie, whatever I can do, our team can do to help you, we want to be part of this very important movement. Joinmama.org isn't just for mothers. It's called Mothers Against Media Addiction, but I presume one day that name will become just mama.org, just the mama part. And it
We
will
we
be
can't. Somebody owns that URL already. They won't give it to us. But here is this. Is my screen sharing properly? I'm trying to share with you. But there's the Surgeon General's advisory. Vivek Murthy has been a leader in this space, and everybody should listen to him. I mean, this is a crisis on the scale of tobacco, and maybe even bigger. And part of why it's such a crisis is because it's not only affecting children, but it's affecting adults. We have a loneliness crisis. And here is an image that helps explain why we're called Mothers Against Media Addiction. Shri, you were writing those stories about AOL Instant Messenger, but what's happened is there's so many digital products and there's so much technology and there's so much screens that we're now all getting information 24/7, and it's overwhelming our brains. Look at this screen. I don't even know where to look, right? I'm a well-educated person. I'd like to think I have a master's degree. I've worked in the media for 20 years. Where are my eyes supposed to focus here? On the photos, on the crawl across the top, on the bottom, on the right-hand side? It's too much. Look at this image. We have put screens everywhere. We put them in restaurants. We put them in waiting rooms. We put them in elevators. We put them in gas pumps. And so, for those of us who didn't, who didn't grow up like that, we at least had years and years to acquire what psychologists would call executive function skills. We have the ability to concentrate. We have the ability to process things in order, take steps before we, do something. We've developed the ability to be able to read a long form article in the newspaper. Young people whose brains are still forming, who are exposed to so much media, they're not actually acquiring the basic building blocks they need in order to be able to function in a healthy way emotionally, to be able to function academically. I mean, have you seen what's happened with America's reading and math scores? That was in the news, a few months back. Some of our students are at lower levels than they were when we started measuring in 1971. So we really can't just keep going along with the incessant media addiction. We have to slow down, and we have to put some common sense regulations in place and develop some healthier habits.
One of the things you said that would be shocking for people, you said that this could be maybe even worse than tobacco. And for all of us who know how bad tobacco is for kids, adults, and everybody, I think that's a wake-up call. Neil's going to give us a thought, and then we're going to move on to read the paper because we only have 30 minutes left with Julie, and we're talking about so many important issues. Everyone, please tag your friends, tell them what you're thinking about here, about the importance of this conversation. And before we're done with the show, I'm going to ask Julie for advice for every age range of kids, the toddlers to preschool, school, high school, college, etc. So she's going to give us that understanding of the landscape. So no matter where you are, you will benefit from this conversation as we go into the last 30 minutes. Over to you, Neil.
I wanted to first recognize a few folks who are watching on Instagram. Kimberly is watching on our Digimentor's Instagram account, a new viewer. She first saw the show last week, so thank you for coming back. And Jessica is watching on your account, Sri, and she mentions another initiative, Wait Until 8th, the idea of holding off on social media and smartphones until kids are in 8th grade. I wanted to ask a question, Julie, starting with that, the advice, if you don't mind, pivoting off of what Stefan's comment was in terms of being really good about monitoring tech use and social media use for his son. Here's the scenario. In January, we got our almost 11-year-old. Emily turned 11 in March, April. A device so she could listen to music, MP3 player. But it also had a Chrome browser, and discovered that she could access YouTube on that. She has spent a lot of time watching YouTube Shorts. That's where Skibbity comes from, among other things. Here's the question. Here's the thing I struggle with. My one thought is to go ahead and get her a smartphone. She has a Gmail account that I manage, right? If I can manage her account, with the Gmail account in terms of time, hours, and monitor what she's watching. With her current device, I can't monitor the time because it's not connected. It's not, there's no phone number to it.
Neil, I'm going to stop you right there. I mean, the
No,
best
tell me.
advice I can give parents is delay, delay, delay. The longer you wait until you give your child access to the internet, the more you are protecting their ability to grow up with in-person, real-life experiences as their primary source of growing. The second they get access to the internet, they have access to YouTube or anything else. They have access to the entire world. And no parent controls are 100% foolproof. I have tried every app on the market. I have tried every control offered by Apple, by YouTube, all of those things. They don't work. The kids always find workarounds. And, you know, Stefan, who was mentioning his own work before, I mean, I strive to be a parent like Stefan. I have 3 kids, and it's a full-time job to just keep up with what they're seeing every day. And unfortunately, what I've learned through my reporting is that even parents who are that involved, because these platforms are unregulated, there is nothing to stop one little thing slipping through. And unfortunately, if your child is having a bad day, because we all have bad days, and they turn to social media on that bad day, you know, I've met parents whose son experienced a breakup. He went to TikTok and looked for, he searched for inspirational quotes to deal with getting over a breakup. And within 3 videos, he was sent content that said, you know how you should handle a breakup with your girlfriend, being dumped by your girlfriend? You should kill yourself. And then she'll know that you really loved her. And he did. And
Oh
so
my God.
there are parents whose children have bought drugs online, and it turned out to be a fentanyl pill and it killed them. Again, you can't protect against every single harm in the world. And I know that the world is filled with risks, but to reduce the number of risks coming to your child, I say hold off as long as you can. I say throw away whatever you bought her and go get an MP3 player that's only music. I have met parents whose children have accessed online pornography through Google Classroom. Google Classroom is not 100% safe.
Wow.
Because it allows you to get to the internet, and the internet is inherently not safe. There are children who have gone to, whose parents don't allow them internet access at home, and they've used school iPads and computers to learn how to hang themselves. There's just so many risks. So again, we're working to prioritize the well-being of young people. And I know Shri wants to get to the newspaper. And when we wrap up, I will give a little more advice for every age range.
Thank you so much.
Julie. Thank you.
Here's my the line that I've, you know, obviously echoing what you've been saying. I said I've been saying this for years. For every set of 6 months, you can delay a young teen from joining platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. You're saving them years of mental health issues down the road. Every 6 months makes a difference. So whatever you can do to delay, I would encourage you to do. The enormous pressure that the kids will put on you. I can tell you all that our kids were the last to get an iPhone in their group, but we gave it to them because at 11, they did a PowerPoint for us showing 92% of their classmates had iPhones.
I hear about these PowerPoints all the time. And Shri, I encourage parents to be like you. And, you know, my kids, I did not let them get phones until they were 12. And they were said, oh, you know, I'm the last child in New York City to not have a phone. And I would say, yes, you're the last child in New York City to not have a phone. But I regret now giving them phones that young. If I had known then what I know now, I never would have done it. And here is a slide that shows what is happening to our students' reading and math scores. So your quote, I think, was really apt, because children's brain development continues all the way into early adulthood. And every month of their life, every week of their life, every day, they're building the neurobiological pathways that they need in order to have the critical thinking skills, in order to have the attention span that they need in order to read, like we're going to do now, of the newspaper. So the longer you delay, the better.
And can we just have that slide one more time, Neil, with the Washington Post story, just to see that? Because I think that shows us the very fact that I remember hearing about it, but I didn't go on all my social platforms and post it, tells me that I wasn't paying enough attention to that. And so that's the chart we saw of the levels of reading scores in the United States has fallen to levels unseen for decades. And you can see the trends, it's going down, and that's problematic for a country that has to compete in a world of all of this new technology. And by the way, it's all going to get worse because of AI. It's already getting worse with AI because you don't even need real images to be sextorted, right? They can make fake images of you and sextort you even if you didn't touch anything. That's the problem that's already having here. Delay is right, says Pradnya. However, even schools are using tablets and Chromebooks in the classroom now, starting in kindergarten. And the pandemic had a lot to do with this. Parents who were very keen to have no screen time were forced to allow their kids because of schools and also because their own, needing the kids to be quiet while working from home. All of those things changed. Naomi says, with the ubiquitous social media landmines targeting teens and younger, I'm grateful my kids are now sensible young adults. You feel that if you escaped, if the kids are just a little bit older, they miss that moment. And this reminds me, because this is about the Times, a very senior Times editor who had retired said he was so glad he had left the Times before all the social media stuff started, because he would have hated having to tweet and Facebook and all of that stuff. And that's where we are. So we have about 20 minutes left with Julie. We're talking about her great work with Mothers Against Media Addiction. And she is obviously a great journalist as well. So we're going to look through the paper and just I'm going to just riff on some stories, and you just jump in whenever you're comfortable commenting on something, and we'll go through there. I do want to mention the assassination attempt and how surprising.
I'm going to stop you.
Mhm.
We don't know if it was an assassination attempt. We know it was a shooting, but we don't have the details yet, right? Of the purpose of that shooting, if the gunman had even had a political agenda. So I just want to be careful about the language that we're using and how we frame these things. If there was a wonderful article on the Ink. I don't know if you follow the Ink. I'm going to pull it up really quick. Anand Girardis had an article this week I encourage everyone to read. But if you call it an assassination attempt, we're giving a certain framing to what happened. If we call it the latest mass shooting, it helps put it in context of all the other shootings that have been happening in the United States. So excuse me for interrupting you, but one of the things I think we need to do when we read the papers, think about how newspapers and news organizations are framing things and how that shapes our perception of what's happening in the world.
Yeah, well said. So tell me what your interpretation of this young man, 20-something or 20-year-old, the fact that he doesn't have the kind of online profile that many people his age have. I know there are kids who all want to be influencers, and there are others who post nothing public these days. So talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get to the paper.
Well, in the paper, I guess I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. I was looking down in the corner about detailing the life of a gunman, though the why is still elusive. My former colleagues, incredible journalists, including Willie Rashbaum, reporting on this. Nobody seems to be able to yet understand the motive of this shooter. And we know from, unfortunately, too many mass shootings in this country that often the person who commits the shooting is not emotionally well. Their purpose is not necessarily political. Sometimes it's because they want to be remembered. Sometimes it's because they want attention. So, in this particular case, it doesn't seem to be someone who was looking for attention through social media, although he did apparently indicate through a gaming social platform that there would be news about him. So I don't know what drove that shooter. I also am very curious. I haven't even seen details yet of former President Trump's injuries. Does anybody know yet if he actually was hit by the bullet or if it was something else that caused the bleeding? I haven't seen any reporting on that yet.
Yeah, it's true. After President Reagan there was an attempted assassination and a shooting of him. The doctors appeared on camera and gave lots and lots of details of what happened. And here we have not seen that, and that's part of the Trump playbook of deciding to control the agenda. In the paper, they have this In Times Past, exploring an artifact from the archives of the New York Times. And this one happens to be about the assassination of John Wilkes Booth. And it says, awful event, President Lincoln shot by an assassin. The deed done at Ford's Theater last night, an act of a desperate rebel. The president still alive at last accounts. No hopes entertained of his recovery. Attempted assassination of Secretary Stewart happened, as we know, that night as well. So just a interesting parallel at this moment. And we had Stuart Elliott, the editor of the advertising columnist for the New York Times, join us many years ago, and he talked about how this corner of the paper was always reserved for a Tiffany ad, and now it's this Monica Rich Kozan that has showed up here for many years now. Neil, he also pays close attention to that. That was the front page. The book review cover is Paying the Price, Long Island Compromise, the new novel by Taffy Brodesser Ackner, fictionalized as the true story of a kidnapped scion. This is interesting because she was also on the cover of the Times Magazine last week. So this is the book review. Very rare to see that kind of double cover and coverage. What are you reading these days, Julie?
Well,
do you have time?
I don't have a lot of time, but I actually took a vacation recently, which had been the first in a really long time. And I read Taffy's first novel, Fleischman is in Trouble, and it was absolutely incredible. Highly recommend it. And last week I read the magazine story you're talking about, in which she explains the real life crime that led her to write this book, and that was in part the inspiration for Fleischman. I know they've turned that into a show or a movie or something. I haven't seen that yet, but highly recommend the book. Can't wait to read this.
Thank you. Wild Child of the City shows kindness at 93 on the Metropolitan cover. Betty Gordon, an ex-actor and barkeep, wrote a children's book to help a friend. And the Metropolitan section is only available for print subscribers in the tri-state area. So we like looking at that. For migrants, A Taste of Home, at a volunteer-run shelter center in Midtown. People from all over the world share meals.
I love that story, by the way. I read that last night, and Winnie Hu is a great Times journalist. She's, used to cover the Albany area. She's always coming up with interesting stories. And what I loved about that story is it looked at how migrants and people who are homeless and don't have access to kitchens, just a simple act of having a meal can be so powerful. And that was really a beautiful piece.
There are many people I know who believe the Chrysler is a more striking and beautiful New York skyline dominant skyscraper. But this story says the Chrysler building, the jewel of the Manhattan skyline, loses its luster. So even the fact it's called not a jewel, but the jewel, says something about it, and those striking eagles that they have here. I've not read this story. I'm sorry that it's showing its age compared to some of the other buildings. But you know what's also showing its age? The new buildings, including the leaky ones that quiver in the wind, people paying $100 million and having leaky ceilings. What about that? Arts and Leisure cover, actors, friends, and superheroes. Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman of Deadpool and Wolverine, and what it's like to play pop culture icons. What is your relationship with movies, film, the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
The one subject that I never covered in my career was entertainment. I was always much more interested in ordinary people and the real world of what was happening than I was in celebrity or entertainment. And also, selfishly, the arts are such a source of joy for me that if I'm looking at art or I see a show, like, I want it to not be work. But that said, I absolutely love, like, inside the Arts and Leisure, there is a section on like photography that our photo editors are following. I mean, I love the recommendations there. Every once in a while I'll read my 10, which is a sort of, they ask someone interesting the 10 things they're reading or following. And, I love being in New York City in the summer because it's such a great opportunity to take advantage of the museums and the shows and the art without the lines and that kind of thing. And, I think I've come to really appreciate the celebrities who take their power and they use it for good and put their weight and their followings behind drawing attention to important causes. So,
well, let's do a shout out to any celebrities who are fighting for the cause you are working hardest on right now.
Well, there's so many, Alicia Reiner, the actress who's part of the Marvel Universe now. She's well known for Orange is the New Black. She's a Mama supporter, came to our rally at City Hall that we did. Lisa Ling, the journalist and TV personality, is a supporter of Mama. We have some others, but I can't announce them yet. So.
Not yet. Okay. Yeah. And by the way, joinmama.org. Everybody check it out. And they're getting a new website. So that's exciting. By the way, I just struck by 2 sports covers for unlikely sports sections. This is the Sunday Styles. Athletes are the new everything. When it comes to fashion, advertising, and branding, models and actors have strong competition. And I hope you get some athletes behind you too. And then this is Travis Kelce's brother, Jason Kelce. And Wall Street pitches new game to players. A private equity firm is creating an investment pipeline for pro athletes who can double as high-profile marketers. Shaquille O'Neal, I think, is the greatest example of people doing that really, really well. Sunday Opinion cover, and we just a couple of more minutes. The Great American Meltdown. Biden and Trump have succeeded in breaking our reality. The Week That Remodeled American Politics by Nick Kristof. The other was a Masha Gessen. The MAGAification of the Republican Party is complete, and what Democrats need to do next by David Brooks. I think my sentence in my opening, my newsletter, Neil can pull it up, about the about Vance was that the MAGAification of the deplorables is now complete with this with what's happening. And then let's look at the New York Times Magazine cover. Is what would it take to free Russell Mays? Flawed science helped convict him of murdering his infant son. He was accused of shaking the baby to death. The DA's office now says it got it wrong. Why is he still behind bars? A very powerful story by Pamela Koloff.
I love anything Pamela Koloff writes. I want to read. Anything Masha Gessen writes, I want to read. One of our most important living journalists. And this headline, though, Biden and Trump have succeeded in breaking our reality. I haven't read the piece yet, so I will, because anything Masha writes, I want to read. But again, from my perspective, these individuals haven't broken our reality. It's our entire media environment,
and this is also making them equally problematic when we know it's not equal.
It's not
equal. And that's part of the problem. Folks, my newsletter here, it says the 2024 MAGA edition of Deplorables is now set. Everyone, srinet.substack.com, srinet.substack.com. We'd love to have you subscribe and join us as we take a look at tech, life, and the intersections of that. And we'll be obviously posting Julie's great tips in the newsletter in the coming weeks. Before we wrap up for today, we're going to give Julie a moment to go off camera, catch her breath, and then come back with tips for people at every age group, for parents at every great age group. And Neil and I are going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and we'll have you out of here in a few minutes. Thank you, Julie. And Neil, what a great show. So much that we have learned together with Julie, and we're so happy to have her with us. And I'm so grateful. I know you learned a lot. My kids are 21, but we are still learning. All of us are learning together.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to this show for a long time. When we first connected with Julia again, she of course was a guest several years ago when she was talking about her previous book, The Women Who Made New York. I think if I'm getting the title right. But what an eye-opening conversation. Something that we've talked about, that you've written about, that we've lived and experienced. But so great to have some expert advice and some very clear direction. Julie did not mince her words, did not pull punches. And I think that's what people need to hear. And I think that's how they need to hear it. I was messaging my wife during the show. We're going to have to watch this together. We're going to have to watch this with Emily and work through some of these issues. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to have some real conversations at home.
And you're doing an amazing job with Emily. Part of it is being direct, clear, and transparent right from the start. And Neil, we have a mailing list for people who want to be
Yes.
abreast and get the links. Even if they can't watch it live, they can see it later. And tell us what else we have coming up.
Absolutely. So if you send an email, we'll add you to our mailing list. We send out one, sometimes 2 emails a week. It's not a lot, but we want to let you know about our next guest on July 28th. Chelsea Cipriano is going to be joining us. She's the managing director for the Common Health Coalition. They're using the lessons of COVID-19 to prepare for the next pandemic. But my note here is that I don't think that we're actually done with this pandemic just yet. We have new variants. We have an uptick in cases. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion. We're going to get back to talking about healthcare next week with Chelsea Cipriano. We also want to remind folks that our show is sponsored by Muckrack. Thank you for being such a longtime sponsor of the show and a supporter of several of SRI's projects. The show is produced by Digimentors, the consulting firm that SRI started with his friend Andrew Lee. I am proud to be the Vice President of Events and Communications for Digimentors. And in particular, Digimentors is the sponsor and offering pro bono support for the mental health show that I produce 2 times a month, Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. Our next episode is going to be coming up July 25th. And our guest is Samantha Collier, and she's going to be talking about thriving and surviving after rape and sexual abuse, a topic that we've discussed on this show several times as well. If you missed it earlier, our previous show was very relevant for this conversation with Julie. Sarah Wilson, a therapist based in Washington State, a former colleague of mine at United Way, she sees teen girls and young adult girls as well. She focused on teen girls and therapy and the themes that come up in her practice. So that's what's coming up around the corner.
Thank you. And we would love to work with anybody who wants to have a bigger digital footprint, is what we say, including, of course, having podcasts like this. So now we're going to bring back our friend Julie to talk about some tips for all of us, because we all need to learn from her, whatever age group that you might have, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, neighbors, teachers, students, all of us need to do this together. So we're going to put you full screen, Julie, to give us some tips, and then we can also then clip that and then share it afterwards as well. So let's do that. And our guest is Julie Scelfo, founder of MAMA, which is Mothers Against Media Addiction.
You know, if you visit us at joinmama.org, you'll see we offer a monthly expert insight series. And each month we have a different guest on who can help parents understand the risks of media addiction, how they can better manage their child's online experiences, but also how we can work together to fight media addiction. And if I'm going to share a slide with you. So let's see. Okay, sorry. I'm pressing the wrong button. I mean, the tips that I want to give each individual to think about as a norm are very similar to the ones Jonathan Haidt proposes. No smartphones until high school, no social media before 16. We have to get phones out of schools so that children can have their school day to learn and have real life experiences. And we also need to give our kids more independence, play, and responsibility in the new world, in the real world, and not just online. It's through real life experiences and interaction that children acquire the skills they need to be healthy and to be able to succeed on an emotional level, on a social level, and academically. So if I can present my slide here we go. These are the ways that Mama is working. We demand that social media apps have safeguards like other consumer products because parents can't do this alone. We have to get smartphones out of schools so that at least kids have 8 hours a day when social media is not trying to hijack their attention, and they can learn and spend time from other people in real life so that they're getting all the facial expressions and interactions they need. And we're giving parents, millions of parents, a nonpartisan platform to work together to protect kids from existing and emergent harms. It is not just the phones. It is also the iPads, the Google Classroom. It's all the technology. And these technologies alone aren't necessarily bad, but it's our overuse of them. It's our addiction to them that's causing real problems. So here's a quick slide that just shows some of the impact that we've had. And again, the best one piece of advice for every parent is delay, delay, delay. The longer that you can delay giving your kids access to the internet and social media, the more you are protecting them from the insertion of these unnecessary risks into their lives.
Wow. Thank you so much. I saw a picture of you with Oprah there as well. And this is what you were saying. People need to use their platforms, if they have one, to help people with this, and parents and children and society with this. And you've done such a great job. We're very grateful to you. Julie, what is your Sunday look like for the rest of the day?
Well, Mama is working on both a local and a national level. So we have chapters in individual communities. And I encourage anyone who's watching who wants to start a Mama chapter in their community to get in touch. And my Sunday includes talking to some Mama chapter leaders. One of my sons is away, but 2 of my sons are home. I'm also hosting my godson this summer and an exchange student from Budapest. So I've got a house full of kids. My Sunday is going to involve going to the farmer's market, cooking a lot of food, and finish reading the newspaper. So
wow. And you had 3 boys and you got a godson too. So that's
what can I say? I grew up with 1 sister. I'm an unlikely boy mom, but here I am. It's been a blast. I love it.
Let's see some of the comments that have come in. Jonathan says, great show, important topic. Thank you. And remember, having to get up to open or close your blinds is good exercise. I love that. Patty says, thank you, Julie, and the entire Read Along team, production team, always inspirational. Lotte on LinkedIn says, thank you. Mary says, if anyone's interested, my Equal Time podcast with Julie is available on the Roll Call podcast site. Ken says, great show. So lucky this group lets me hang around, privileged and blessed. Ken, thank you for being there. And Neil's biggest fan is his mom, and she's watching. Great show, highly educational. She has grandchildren and is paying close attention to this. So thank you very much. Thank you, Julie. And
thank you,
have a
Shri
wonderful
and Neil. It's such a pleasure to
you.
spend time with you. Thank you for your great show and for continuing to promote quality journalism, which we all need. Have a great Sunday, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for this 20 years ago.
You're welcome. And thank you 20 years ago and every day.
Thank
You're
you.
a pioneer.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.